Hello there, everybody, and thank you so very much for hanging out with us again today as TLC presents Todd-versations. We are really excited who we have. Look who's sitting next to me, my friend, Matt Rogers, the co-founder and general manager of AgSocio. Brother Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Todd. How's it going?
Super. I am glad you're here, brother. I really am. I'm excited about chatting today because I think that what you are doing is very, very, very worthy of our time. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about ag labor. We spend a lot of time talking about these issues, but I think that people don't fully understand what's actually going on out there in the world of agricultural labor. And I think we've got to elevate that conversation because ag labor is a positive cost of food that we must recognize or we are going to be screwed, guaranteed. Yeah. So I hope you're ready, brother, because I have a laundry list of questions. I generally do. And like I tell people all the time, some of these conversations get me revved up, and I'm revved up for this one because I do feel it's a really valuable one to have. I'm excited that you're here hanging out with us. So again, thank you for being here. So you ready to go, man?
Ready to go. If I don't know the answers, I'll make something up.
Well, you know, that's the beauty of this, right? If you make something up and somebody else doesn't know the answer, you're technically right. Right? I believe that's part of the I believe that's part of like the BS manual. I think it's like page 4 or something. I'm not even sure.
Let's do it.
All right, brother, let's go. So I think it's really important that everybody knows a little bit more about you right from the start, like where your trajectory in produce, where a lot of people know who you are. Let's be honest, right? You've been around a while, but I think it's important that people know where you came from, because I think that, I don't want to say upbringing in produce, but your trajectory of your career has certainly affected you and has certainly brought you to a point of attention that I think AgSocio is directly reflective of what's in your heart today. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you just to share a little bit about your background in produce and kind of how you got to sitting right there today.
Yeah, thanks for that question to set the stage. Well, I guess my produce, I came up through Whole Foods, basically. Right. So I spent 13 years at Whole Foods in all in the national level or the global level, always on the procurement side of the business, working with suppliers and on the supply chain in produce. So that's my entire experience. My first job with Whole Foods was actually in Costa Rica as a liaison in a partnership with a sustainable agriculture school there called Earth University. And I was lucky enough to get that job, which was supposed to be to try to figure out how to help that university sell stuff to Whole Foods and generate some revenue for the nonprofit. And that one thing led to another. That turned into a produce job because they had a big banana farm that needed a home. Whole Foods really take a risk on that initiative. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears later, and 13 years down the road, they've sold hundreds of millions of Earth University bananas, and it's still a label people can find in most of the stores most of the time. That job turned into a whole series of jobs as a buyer, leading the field team, the Whole Foods famous bird dog team, and then eventually into different leadership positions in Whole Foods produce world, where I ended up managing food safety, compliance, sustainability, and labor issues, as well as sort of playing a leadership role in the overall procurement operation there. And It was through that work with our supply chain on trying to understand issues that growers face and issues that we were being asked about by customers and media and investors and everybody else, and try to figure out what the answers are to things about relating to the environment or relating to social issues, that I became so aware of the details of the labor problem. And that kind of led to where I am now. But a lot of my time at Whole Foods was also spent internationally building fair trade programs, building a lot of the, what was called whole trade, and I think is now called sourced for good in Whole Foods. So we, a lot of times sort of seeing some of the innovative growers out there doing cool things with labor, and then also dealing with the problem children, the things that would come up that we'd have to go out and say, oh, what happened here? So kind of seeing both of those, both the full spectrum, sort of gave me, I think, the perspective to see that there was an opportunity to do what we're trying to do now.
Right. And I'm going to get into specifically, so people aren't freaking out, like, what are we talking about? I'm going to get into AgSocio in a second, but I really feel it's important to kind of frame up a couple of questions before we get there, because I think it's super relevant. One of the things that you're doing now that's important to you is that you serve on the board of CERTO, And I'd love for you just to, as well as the Equitable Food Initiative. And I believe certo in Spanish is like certain or true, correct? Yeah. Could you just touch a little bit about what certo and the Equitable Food Initiative are first?
Yes. So Cierto is a nonprofit H2A recruiter. And we're going to talk a bit about what H2A is. It's the agricultural guest worker program that is growing very quickly in this country as a really the only alternative to the need for labor. And there are all kinds of challenges that emerge with international recruitment, of recruiting people from one country to come work in another. These international worker programs are not unique to the United States or to agriculture in the United States. They're all over the world. And there are a lot of known pitfalls. And Cierto exists to try to create an alternative that is transparent and that is worker focused, that alleviates some of the exploitation that can occur either intentionally or unintentionally in this system, so that there's a good, transparent alternative for people like us at AgSocio and other growers, other employers to use. So I serve on their board of directors, and we're a relatively small organization, but growing, and it's a really good alternative for people who are looking for kind of maybe a newer, more modern approach to H2A recruitment.
Which we are going to get into, believe me, because I'm so impressed with what you guys are up to. So Equitable Food Initiative, just real quickly on that one as well.
The Equitable Food Initiative, I'm not on their board of directors, I'm on their standards committee.
Right.
And the Equitable Food Initiative is a no longer new third-party certificate that it's a label that growers can achieve through a certification process, and they look at food safety, social accountability, and pesticide use. I guess are kind of the three pillars of the standard. And it's very much more than a certification program. It's very much driven. It's sort of driven by a worker engagement process. It's really about trying to develop a workforce engagement strategy and culture that can lead to so much positive benefit for everybody involved. So I've been involved with them in that capacity since I was at Whole Foods.
Right.
I sort of represented Whole Foods on the standards committee, and then they just let me hang around after I left.
Well, that's nice. You're a good guy. I don't see why they wouldn't. So, and I appreciate you framing that up, but I think it's important. I wanted to kind of give people a perspective of who you are, because when we drill down, when I get into the next couple of questions, I just think it's really important that people hear from you who you are before you answer these questions. Because I believe that based on what I know and knowing you and knowing what you're doing, I feel it's going to exemplify, it's going to lift up what you're all about. And I just think that to me, I felt it was important. So let me ask you the tough, real question. How screwed up is the labor situation in ag today? No bullshit. Lay it on us. How bad is it?
It's very bad. It's bad. And I think and I'll tell you how, but it's important for people, I think we talk about agricultural labor or farm workers, these generic terms. The reality is agriculture is such a diverse place. I mean, you got dairy, livestock, the grain and commodity type production, specialty fruits and vegetables, nuts, a bunch of stuff I didn't mention. So many different types of food production and so many different places, all across the country and so many different seasons and so many different types of jobs, from the truly unskilled, maybe a guy with a hoe cleaning around the edge of a ranch. You don't really need to know much. It's just manual labor, up through very quickly moving across the spectrum to much more skilled and ultimately highly skilled. So it's everything, right? It's a huge, diverse industry and a huge, diverse workforce that supports it. Right. But the problem is acute, and there are just not enough people to do all of the work, and there are many reasons for that, which we can get into if you like. But I think driven primarily by the fact that much of agriculture, and I'll speak to what I know, which is really the produce industry, and really I'm not from California, but I'm now a California guy. So my experience is limited, and it's a big world out there. So I can't answer for everybody, but for a long time, agriculture depended on a constant flow of young, undocumented people coming across the border from Mexico.
Right.
And basically unlimited for a long time. So it was relatively inexpensive labor, and no shortage of bodies to do the work. So agriculture didn't need to be smart about how it utilized labor because it was abundant.
Right.
But stretching back for many years now, really back to at least the beginning of the Obama administration, maybe earlier, that situation has changed dramatically. The border is no longer porous, has not been for quite a long time. So there is no longer a fast flow of people coming across. The economy in Mexico is also different and better. There are more opportunities there, so there's less drive for migration. And then folks who are already here are getting older. So they are less able, less willing to do the same work that they've been doing for all these years. So the existing workforce is kind of aging. And they're also, agriculture has always kind of been this low pay. The work is very difficult. You're outside, it's long hours, it's difficult work for relatively little pay. So people will go do something else as soon as they have an opportunity to do something else.
Right.
So agriculture really struggles, I think, now as somewhat self-fulfilling result of our own action or inaction over the years. But we're at the point now where there are growers, people are making decisions to plant or not plant or dropping acreage because they don't have the people to support it. And there's a point at which the dollars don't matter. You can offer more money, it doesn't solve the problem. And just one more point, people who are not in the industry or who are not on this end of the industry tend to think, well, you got unemployment over here, overall, like there's people available to do the work. The reality is not everybody can do this work. Not everybody is willing to do this work, regardless of the wages, really.
Right.
It is not for everybody. And so you can't just take somebody, from the hospitality industry, for example, back during coronavirus, right? Everything was closed, but ag's working. It was, oh, perfect. You just move the people over. No, that doesn't, doesn't.
Well, I think willingness is a huge word, right? It's this willingness to work. And I think that's a challenge.
The work ethic of people who work, in the produce industry in general, food industry, but the work ethic of people who work in agriculture is a sight to behold. This is from farmers and all of the various levels of supervisor management down to the hourly worker. The number of hours and the amount of effort that has to go into it is impressive, and not everybody willing or able to work that hard.
Well, I don't think people realize, and I did a broadcast with Dr. Jennifer Tucker with the NOP, and one of the things we talked about was labor, as they're working on their human capital project, trying to advance retention throughout the USDA and the NOP, et cetera. I think it's 10.9%. I'm going to call it 11 because round it up. 11% of the labor force is in agriculture in this country, which shocked me.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. So when you start to think about all the moving parts, and all of a sudden you lose 10% of those moving parts, 15% of those moving parts, 30% of those moving parts, you have a very wobbly wheel.
Yes,
for sure. And we're not slowing down. It's not like we're not producing more food because we have more people. So it's an issue. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I appreciate kind of the way you framed that up. So now let's get to the question that everybody's dying. Tell us, what's AgSocio? What's it about?
So AgSocio is a farm labor and service provider, or a farm labor contractor, which is the sort of the general term, which can be a bad word, right, depending on where you're coming from. But we, for those who are the uninitiated, we are an employer of people who would be considered farm workers. We have all different types of things that we do. But we basically employ the workforce, and we go out and work for farmers who hire us to come in and do particular jobs for them. So we are like a third-party service provider for growers. And this farm labor contractors, there are thousands in the country, maybe double-digit thousands. You have to be federally registered to be a farm labor contractor in the United States. So there are many, many, many of them. Everything from very large, sophisticated, tens of thousands of employees, professional operations, down to an individual with a pickup truck, which is probably the majority of the total number, although not the majority of employment. And generally speaking, labor contractors bill wages plus a commission. And then we cover things like it's our workers' compensation. We pay the payroll. We do the payroll taxes. We're bringing the bathrooms in the shade, in our case, transportation, all kinds of other things to the field. We're kind of responsible for the workforce. So we bring the workforce ready to go, the equipment, and so on. And then we come in and do the work that the grower needs to have done.
Right. So we talked about it a little bit earlier. I want to get a little deeper with this question. How did you identify, here you are, you're doing your thing, you're at Whole Foods, you're clipping along, and all of a sudden you wake up one Tuesday and go, I want to make a change and I want to make a positive change in this space. So how did you identify the need, for AgSocio?
Yeah, good question. When we were,
my questions don't suck. So don't, they're going to get better as we get going. Trust me.
So when we were at Whole Foods, one of my responsibilities for a number of years was this deep dive into our supplier requirements. What does it mean? Sort of an upgrade of what were then outdated, stuff that we ask suppliers in order to be able to sell to Whole Foods in the produce department. So we went through kind of the whole A to Z list. I made a lot of friends. One of the things we really wanted to look at was labor standards, right? What are the working conditions and the employment conditions of the people that were in our Whole Foods supply chain?
Right.
And so, in the course of doing that research, I kept asking suppliers who were not necessarily always growers, right, to a retailer, hey, what about all this stuff about labor? Oh, I don't know. Let me ask the grower. Okay, ask the grower. Well, I don't know. I have to ask the labor contractor. And the labor contractor, and it would always come back like this black box. I don't know. Can't get it. We don't know. The labor contractor, And so I said, well, what's a labor contractor? So we started getting into that concept. Oh, there's a third party. It's actually a labor supply chain. There's a food supply chain. There's actually a labor supply chain also. Where are the people all coming from that are doing all this work? They don't necessarily work for who you think they work for.
Right.
So supply chain management from at that point, Whole Foods perspective, I was thinking, oh, that's a problem, right? We're trying to gain transparency into our supply chain, but here's a black box. And we kept coming back. No, I can't get it. Oh, I don't know. It's kids. That's their records. We can't. And so we started looking into it and realized, well, I think there's an opportunity for a company that is transparent, that will participate, that'll be a participant in what everybody from, the whole supply chain is trying to, is accountable to somebody for what are you doing, to open records for auditing and all kinds of other purposes, let alone reputational management, all this stuff. I thought, there's got to be an opportunity here to do something that is maybe a more modern approach to what turns out to be a very old industry, which is still very informal in many ways. So that's where, the concept for AgSocio emerged. Wow, can we do better for the workforce by being a better employer, it's not rocket science, but by trying to employ or deploy, the types of benefits and recognition and work environment and consistent human resources support, all this stuff that is standard in other industries, but has been lacking in the agricultural employment world, especially in the labor contractor segment, which is growing. As a share of total employment, more and more is going to third-party employers like us. So we thought, okay, we could probably do better for the workforce. And if we can do better for the workforce, we can become an employer of choice, right, which is a term that's buzzing around a lot these days. But but can we be the best employer so that those people who are going to be in agriculture want to come work for us? So we can have this loyal, consistent, trained, efficient, productive workforce because we are a better employer to them. And then in that way, provide a better service to the growers who are also underserved by a lot of labor contractors who are not necessarily helping growers with their costs that are going up, right? With like the minimum wage in California, up, a number of out, down, cost of everything is increasing. The labor, we got to be smarter. So there's a way to do both things. We thought there was a space to do both things. So that's what we're trying to be. We're trying to be a professional, modern, transparent, accountable, tech-enabled, smart, agile labor solution for growers and the best employer in the market for
workers. I love that. I mean, I absolutely love it. And, bottom line, positive cost of food, right? We have to have these conversations no matter in all aspects of food, and we're on to labor, but I mean, we have to have these conversations because I don't think people recognize the disparity between a lot of what you're doing and what a whole lot of other people aren't doing. I've been around in this space a long time, and I can share some war stories of things that I have seen or things that I've heard. People are being charged to get on the van to go to work, every single day. They're $5 to get on, $5 to get off, all this other, just whatever story you want to get in. But I think that to come from a perspective, and that's why I led in earlier about coming from your heart, right? For coming from a perspective of trying to raise the bar, and hold everybody up to a higher level is what positive cost of food is all about. And I commend you for what you shared and sharing the differences for what you're doing, and I want to get into those a little bit later, more specifically, but I just wanted to say, I appreciate what you've said, to that point and talking about what kind of goes on. Tell me a little bit about some of the common, and I touched on it briefly, but some of the common misconceptions you deal with as a labor provider, right? Because there's words like, and I'm not going to be despair, but there's words like coyote and there's words like this, and there's just all this drama that comes around it because there's people out there that just aren't doing a good job for people, right? They're hurting our industry by not doing a good job.
Right. Yes, there are, I don't know if there are misconceptions because some of them are true, right? Like you're right. There's the farm labor contractors to a lot of people, like say a worker advocate. That's a bad word, right? It is perceived as an attempt to avoid accountability. It's perceived as, a grower hires a labor contractor because then I wash my hands of it. It's not my liability. You pay them, don't pay them.
Right.
It's not my thing. That did for a while drive some of the popularity of labor contracting, no doubt about it, right? It's one step removed. That's not a valid, really even approach anymore, especially not in California, where you're in it. You hire a labor contractor, you have liability. I mean, not maybe on every single thing, but you're not excused by the fact that you hired somebody else to do something. If push comes to shove, in this state at least, the grower's in it with you. So there's really not. But the misconceptions, I think the reputation of the farm labor contractor is that there's a lack of formality. I think that's probably a truth with the majority of operators.
Sure.
Lack of formality of employment. It's a very informal space where people will show up in the field and get hired in the field and go to work at that same moment, right? It's not like you're going to fill out necessarily an application in an office and do all your stuff, right? At some point, the paperwork has to happen, but you have a certain amount of time legally to do all that. So like there's this high turnover, low relationship dynamic that in a labor contractor is hiring some foremen, and the foremen really bring the people. And so the people kind of work for the foreman, and the foreman passes through the labor contractors because that's the company, ends up being the entity who has the insurance and they have the relationship with the grower or whatever, but they're not really necessarily doing a whole lot. They're kind of like a labor broker a lot of people, and they have these different foremen, and foreman jumps to another guy, and he jumps to another guy, and then, the relationship, but for the worker, they don't know who they're necessarily working for, right? Who do you go to if things are off track, right? If either transportation is whacked or there's no bathrooms, or worse, there's sexual harassment, sexual assault, physical assault, all kinds of threats. This is the worst of the cases, right? But it has happened, and it does happen. And as a result, the few perpetrators of those few bad actors, like any industry, like anything, the few bad actors cause a negative perception
spiral
whole segment. And
right.
And it continues to go on. There's a few news stories that are currently bubbling up just in this area about people doing ridiculous things. So our approach again is like, well, we want to be the ones, like, we're not going to cause that problem for anybody, right? We're going to be the ones where we're trying to really develop a direct relationship with everybody who works with us, right? We're not hiring foremen who bring people. We're hiring foremen who work for us, 4 people work for us professionally. That's what it is. And then we're hiring people separately for us through a process that's as formalized as we can get it. And we're attempting to, professionalize the agricultural employment experience, and hopefully that way we're providing a better work environment and better employment environment for workers, which, as I said earlier, hopefully have people want to work for us. But then also our objective, our big bet is, well, if we're doing that, then we should be able to do better for our customers. First of all, we're not going to create any legal liabilities for them, because we're doing as we have a beyond compliance mentality. And it's, compliance is a daily challenge. So I'm humbly, a lot of laws in California that have emerged, and in the US that have emerged as a reaction of lawmakers to all of the bad things that have happened. But like anything, those of us who follow the rules follow all these rules, right? There's constantly new requirements, right? Because the reaction for every bad thing is always pass a new law. But again, like anything, the reaction is never enforced. Let's increase enforcement. It's always just, okay, more laws. Well, right. So for those of us who are following the rules, it's very frustrating, because another thing to do. Meanwhile, the guys who are ignoring it are just going to keep ignoring it. So, right. Well, that's right. That's everybody deals with that, right? If you're a rule follower, whatever your business is, if you're following the rules, you've got the cheaters, and it's life. But in this industry, especially, there's a lot of that. It's a very informal space. It has been, and so that's our opportunity, is to be different. Well,
it is life, but more importantly, it's lives, plural, right? And it's about uplifting people, right? If you're uplifting people, they uplift. We continue that cycle of positivity, and I think that's super important. And labor certainly needs to be held, I think, in that kind of higher standard thought process. So I'm going to get a little bit down in the weeds a touch, because I think this is an important thing for people to hear. And I know we use the name, and H2A is out there all the time in the news and the media. And if you ask somebody what it means, they probably think it's a vitamin or whatever the case may be. But nonetheless, can you just give us the what is H2A program, and give us a kind of where that is, what it is, et cetera?
Yes. So the H2A program is called a guest worker program. It's a temporary visa program that is managed by the federal government, U.S. federal government, by the State Department, along with all the other types of visas that are issued by consulates around the world for people to come into the United States for whatever reason. There are work visas, and H2A is one category of those. That is the classification for seasonal agricultural workers. H2A is that one. There's also H2B, which is seasonal non-ag. So that's like your landscape businesses, your golf course people, your resort areas, that seasonal non-ag. Mm-hmm. And then there are the high-tech type visas also. You hear about H1B, all different classifications of temporary visa or work visas that the United States government offers to people who qualify for different programs. And there is one for ag, and it's called H2A.
Right.
And it has its whole range of requirements, and there's a whole bureaucratic process that you have to follow in order to apply. As an employer, if I want to participate in the H2A program, I want to bring workers here on visas that the United States government is going to give me permission to utilize. We follow this whole process to submit an application with all of our licenses, with all of our work sites where they're going to be working, all of the housing where they're going to be living, what is our transportation plan. All of this stuff has to be submitted in advance. We have to justify that there is a need for temporary foreign workers to come in to do a particular job by showing that there are not domestic workers available to do that job. So you have to go through a recruitment process where you're actually trying to recruit people. Of course, we're always trying to hire U.S. residents, local employees. So not a challenge for us to demonstrate that, but you have to demonstrate, look, I'm trying to hire local people. There's a formal process you follow to do that.
Right.
And then you go through this process, and assuming you qualify with the various federal agencies that are involved, and there's a state agency that's in every state in the country that is kind of assigned as the counterpart for the federal government at the state level. And they're actually the ones who assess that the workers are needed, as it happens a little closer to the ground.
Right.
So the Economic Development Department, and some other state would be whoever, So you pass all these requirements by all these different agencies. You kind of move through this workflow, and at the end of it, you come out approved for however many visas you were able to justify you needed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go recruit employees to fill those visas. And then they go into the consulate, wherever they are, for an interview. There's an interview process that they have to go through where they will be vetted for prior border crossings, any legal trouble that they've gotten into up here. They may have, they will do the U.S. government does its due diligence. So you have to recruit well, and then when you bring your recruits in for these interviews, they will emerge either with the visa or not after a couple of days, and then with that visa in hand, they can cross the border on the date that you had originally submitted way back that you need them to cross. There's a finite timeline, 10 months, no longer. It can be as short as you want. And so those are basically the parameters. You have to provide housing,
right,
free of charge. And there are federal requirements, and there may be state requirements, which there are in California, that you have to meet for the quality of the housing, square footage, cooking facilities, bathroom facilities, et cetera, all certain specs. And we're inspected. In California here, we're inspected by 2 different agencies at least once a year. We're getting 3 inspections per year on every housing location that we have right now.
Wow.
You also have to provide transportation daily from the housing to the work sites, right, to the ranches, round trip, free of charge. And there are all kinds of requirements for driver safety, vehicle safety, et cetera, that we have to follow here in California. And you have to provide round trip transportation. You have to pay all the costs of the recruitment process.
Right.
All the visa paperwork and filing fees, but also the transportation of that recruit from wherever they live to that border town or the town where they hit the consulate appointment, their food and lodging, and then their international transportation to get them from the border or deeper in Mexico, maybe by air, wherever it is.
Right.
And then there's H2A employees that come from Ireland. There's H2A employees that come from the
Sure.
vast majority of from Mexico, but there are many different countries. So people are flying, people are coming by ground. And so you're paying all those costs.
I don't think people I don't know necessarily that everybody actually realizes what is involved in this process. And I also don't think that, especially the way you framed it up. I mean, I don't think people necessarily understand how important a role the H2A program plays in agriculture. I mean, because you're talking about, we're trying to recruit here. That's not working. Now we've got to go do this. I think it's a very interesting dynamic and an interesting comparison. Share a little bit more. I want to get a little bit more specific about what you guys are doing differently with your H2A, right? Because you guys are, let's call it, I mean, you guys are more socially conscious. You are a little bit, you're in a different mindset than a lot of companies. So can you get into details a little bit about how you kind of customized, I guess, for lack of a better word, what you guys are doing?